Hey kids, it's that time of year again. So get under your covers, snuggle up with a stubby Victoria bitter, and grab your plush Roo of its optionally mandatory Dundee hat. Because Uncle Barry's coming tonight in his ute before he has to go back to Bendigo since Centrelink still hasn't come. That's right, we're talking about the great state down under. It's Australia time.
The story will continue after this.
One of the most Australian things I have known about is the Bogan, be it through videos like these,
Get in the car, Morty! Get in the car!
I'm on Bogan! So leave me alone!
Alright, let's go to Bottle I'm shouting.
or just stories from the web. Bogans themselves tend to be an interesting subculture of the common Australian. The term bogan is used to describe poorer and trashier Aussies. It can be compared to the term redneck in the US or even chavs in the UK. And it seems they share more of their American counterparts than the British ones, drinking an unhealthy amount of beer, fighting shirtless, wearing their respective flags, and talking about thongs. You get the picture. Now, much like its across the water counterparts, the term is considered offensive by some. Mostly those who fall slightly under the term, but those who are too far into it accept it wholeheartedly through linguistic reclamation. There are other terms for the bogan, and while they aren't fully similar, our friends over at the Western Australia Newsreel Corporation can help us out here with the differences.
The ochre, described by Richard Neville as camaraderie with a touch of good-hearted sexism. The word comes from the nickname for the name Oscar, and since the 20s was used as a term for a stereotypical Australian Aussie. With these in mind, one can see that the images of the ochre are similar to a lot of other countries' stereotypes of Aussies. They wear a slouched hat or a cobra hat with corks, cocky clothes, and usually have a can of beer in their hand and live out in the bush. Seen here is a good example of the ochre stereotype.
Good day, Bruce!
Oh, hello, Bruce!
How are you, Bruce?
Been crook, Bruce.
Where's Bruce?
It's not here, Bruce.
The larrikin, originally meaning hooligan, Australian English has taken this term and molded it through the nation's penal colonial history. Larrikins of the 20th century Australia were known to converge in gangs and commit acts of vandalism, arson, and antisocial behaviour. The term does have positive connotations as well. Like with many other words in the Australian vernacular, it is used with an inverted meaning. Therefore, the larrikin is a term of endearment in the right context. Much like the bogan, the larrikin engages in activities deemed anti-authoritarian, as well as having a good-hearted nature underneath their guise of social mischief.
Much like the young owls when you get some poof.
Ah, well, that's what I get for taking a VHS tape from the dumpster behind the old Video Easy. Thanks, Western Australia Newsreel Corporation. The term bogan is currently of unknown origin, but one word does have similar connotations. Yob, literally boy backwards, is a term originating from the UK in the 1850s. By the 1930s, it describes someone who behaves in an uncultured, impolite, or generally hooligan-esque manner. It has been used frequently throughout much of the non-American, English-speaking world, mostly Ireland, the UK, and Australia. Modern usage of the term includes the Australian phrase yabo, which has the same definition as the original word, but a more lighthearted and positive connotation in its usage. And much like a different word, which I'm going to censor everywhere but the subtitles, in Australian culture. As for the original bogan, the late 70s to early 80s saw the first uses of the term. It is, however, known that many sources cannot pinpoint the specific origin of the term and where it comes from. One belief is that it comes from the Sydney western suburbs and the term Westie, which evolved into bogan because of the river of the same name in western New South Wales, which by comparison is more in the bush than the coastal Sydney. This geographical situation is probably why the term Westie evolved into a similar term as ochre. The second, from the same time it first appeared, comes from the Melbourne suburbs, with no specific origin outside of the information that it may come from teenage slang. And from what research I have done, it could be something like that, as a fictional bogan doll was mentioned offhandedly in a 1984 article from a student magazine at Xavier College. Both have their reasons for being the possible origins of the bogan, and I cannot say which I agree with more. There is, however, a more datable usage of the term from the magazine Tracks in 1985, with this quote: "So what if I have a mohawk and wear Doc Martens, or boots for all you uninformed bogans?" Which does well to imply the bogan as an uneducated and backward stereotype by having them not understand contemporary cultures of a more urban Aussie. In late 1988, Australian TV series The Comedy Company premiered. And with it came a memorable sketch series throughout the free season runtime, involving actress Marianne Faye as schoolgirl Kylie Mole.
My name's Kylie, and if you can think of the spackest holiday ever, well, that's what I'm having right now. No, because guess what we had to do on Saturday? Go to the national park. Spewing, because only Bogans and parents go to national parks.
There it was. Let me replay it in case you missed it.
Because only Bogans and parents go to national parks.
Yep, she said Bogan. This was one of many entries that determined a popular Australian strine, and this time it seemed to be more mainstream. From the 90s to the 2000s, the word bogan appeared loosely in Australian vernacular and culture. It wasn't until the mid-2000s that it appeared in the Microsoft Office Dictionary, and other sources soon followed. 2010 saw the book Things Bogans Like be published and rise to a bestseller. In 2013, the Bogan test was created by Australian website news.com. More as a joke, but we're going to accept it as a source so I can at least mention it here. For those of you who don't know, linguistic reclamation is the process of a group taking a word with negative connotations towards themselves and embracing it as their own. Some good examples include peckerwood for white people, which has been adopted by prison gangs, South Africa's basta by its mixed race population, and a bunch of slurs I cannot say without losing my broadcasting license to the feminist movement and the black community. The same process can be seen with the bogan. Up through the 1990s, the word had negative connotations, meaning something similar to redneck or chav. But nowadays, it seems much of Aussie culture has reclaimed this word, and, much like the aforementioned examples, many use it with pride to describe themselves. Of course, this is much more of a demographics thing, with the connotations behind it being drawn out the 90s as well. Those over 30 still hold a negative association with it, while those under 30 are more likely to embrace it wholly or even ironically. The cub, or cashed up bogan, is a relatively new subculture of the bogan subculture. As you can tell by their name, cubs are bogans who have come into a considerably larger amount of wealth than they are used to, be it through professional sports or luck at a blue-collar job. Those cubs have a lot of money, but considerably poor taste or flashy choice in their purchases. Thank your uncle, who works as a plumber, winning the lottery and buying a McLaren GT, but he still lives in a trailer park and wears the same white tank top with a mustard stain from that 4th of July party back in 2008. Now, while you think that it just might be cubs and regular bogans, you forget that there's always a regional variation for every single slang word. Bevan, or Bev. Booner, Chigga, Chig, or Chigga, from the Chigwell suburb. Scoza. Westy, though it's not equivalent to bogan in usage, it still shares the same cultural stereotype. Something bogans have done considerably well in a considerably shorter amount of time is immerse themselves in the Australian pop culture. Here's a few good examples.
Kick the ball! Yeah, kick the bloody ball!
In a sort of game of chicken, the two Bogans face off and compete to find out which one is the bigger pussy.
And of course, those aforementioned skits from the comedy company. Bogan culture seems to be something that I have a hard time defining in my research, and it seems to be a hard thing for actual researchers to find as well. But seeing as it is a culture, I've decided to divide it up into the visual aspects of cultures. Flannel, stubby shorts, floral workwear, mostly seen on road crews, Uggs, jeans, and black leggings for women. They consume large amounts of alcohol, be it Victoria Bitter, Foster's, or Heineken. The stereotypical bogan likes to drink and drive, or drive recklessly, usually in a ute or a Holden's, which are all poorly maintained. And for music, it's mostly classic Aussie rock, think AC/DC or Midnight Oil. And many bogans are anti-authoritarian, which does lead to a lot of involvement with the police, as well as being jingoistic and non-conforming. Think people like the Steel Nile Vandals, or the Soul Crew. That is if they decide to go to war with kangaroos. The bogan lifestyle is, again, much like its international counterparts. Usually they live in less than well-off communities, have some degree of reliance on the Centrelink system, smoke, and drive one-down family cars like the Holden Commodore. Back to what I said at the beginning of the video, some do consider the word bogan offensive, and while it seems to be more prevalent over the age of 30, there usually is a sort of contextual stigma with words like that. Now, you may realize that a term describing an uneducated, lazy, and continuously drunk person may be from some snob off in Double Day. A lot of hatred comes to the bogans because they don't fit in with the middle-class assumptions seen in Australia. Because they don't follow the trends of the times, they're seen as out of touch, much like the redneck in America, and are shunned by those who are more literate in what they themselves consider high culture. There always seems to exist a divide and stereotyping of less well-off people, either because of those class differences or one very vocal person having a bad experience with an outlier of the group. And hey, after an episode like this, why don't we all just set down our differences, grab a schooner of a drink of your choice, and watch some footy.
The two best followed clubs here in Germany, in a fixture that strikes a resonant chord around the world.
Wait a minute, this isn't the footy.